Hello and welcome everyone to the National Competitiveness Council's Forum of 2020. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Sarah Eisen. I work at CNBC as an anchor of Closing Bell, and I am privileged that I've been a part of this forum for a number of years. I've never done it out of my bedroom, which also functions as a studio for live television, but I'm thrilled to be with you having these important conversations and also to kick off what is our first panel, which hopefully should set the agenda and the table for a lot of the discussions today about how we can improve our nation's competitiveness and specifically around innovation. I want to introduce our distinguished lineup of speakers for the panel, starting with Michael Crow, who is with us. He's the president of Arizona State University. Mahmood Khan, he's the chairman and CEO of Life Biosciences. Ryan Moynihan is the CEO and chairman of Bank of America. Lonnie Stevenson, international president of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Deborah Wynne-Smith, of course, president and CEO of the Council on Competitiveness. And Thomas Zachariah, who's the laboratory director of Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Thank you all for joining in this conversation. It should be a big variety of perspectives here on this critical subject. And I do want to launch the conversation with Deborah because you do have an exciting, important new announcement regarding a new report on this topic.
Thank you, Sarah. And let me just say how much we value and appreciate our long strategic partnership with CNBC. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
It's an exciting day for the Council on Competitiveness and our National Commission on Innovation and Competitiveness Frontiers. We're formally releasing the first year, our flagship groundbreaking report, Competing in the Next Economy in the Age of Innovation. This report culminates an incredible year of work bringing together CEO leaders from industry, academia, labor, and our national labs to really understand the new dynamics of this age of innovation and charting a policy agenda for how our nation can optimize its game and prepare all our citizens for a new future of innovation, of inclusivity, as well as ensuring the full participation of all our citizens to shape this world. Really, the major goal of this report is to increase our innovation capacity tenfold. It's an audacious goal, and it has four strategic pillars. The first is we have to increase tenfold the leadership and national strategies for innovation. We must increase the number of innovations that we develop and deploy at commercial scale, and we have to increase the speed at which our nation innovates. And fourth, as I've said, increase the number and diversity of all Americans engaged in our great innovation economy. We know as we've entered the 21st century's third decade, we have intense global competition coupled to the transformations of our economy brought on by the great revolutions in science and technology and the transformations of new industries, new products, new services, how we live and work at warp speed. So competing in the next economy is the first step out of a very ambitious goal for our nation. We look forward to the private-public sector partnerships that will carry this forward. And I want to thank the tremendous leadership and vision of our commissioners who will be speaking now on this inaugural panel for the forum. So thank you all for participating today.
Thank you, Deborah, for setting the table and for having me. Want to dive into it and some of the takeaways from this report, which I also read, and there's a lot here for us to discuss and for me to discuss when we go on CNBC that relates to business and the economy. Mahmood, you've got an interesting perspective as someone who worked for a large company, multinational like PepsiCo, and now a smaller life sciences company. What are the takeaways for businesses, both big and small, from the report and on addressing innovation? And what do you see in the innovation agenda, particularly for your smaller life sciences companies and others like it?
So let me thank you, Sarah. This is an amazing milestone after over a year of work by the Commission. So with a lot of careful thought from all sectors. And I think that leads to the answer to your question. The first is, what's common between big companies and small companies, regardless of size or sector, is that innovation is the lifeline for their growth, for, in fact, their sustainability, and ultimately their competitiveness on a global scale. We're not competing just with America, we're competing with the world. And this, coming to this report, it lays out what are the components, the key components that need to exist, some within industry, some outside industry in terms of the policy framework, and all of the inputs that any company, whether it's PepsiCo or Life Biosciences, needs to continue to thrive. Now, from a small company perspective, small companies, while we have focus, we're typically much more nimble and fast. We are totally dependent on the ecosystem that supports a small company, whether it's the suppliers, the financial markets, the capital, which is funding the ecosystem, ultimately the talent pool that we have access to. And one of the reasons, in my opinion, we have such a concentration of innovation sort of based companies on the coast is the concentration of talent and capital. We need to think about how to democratize that talent, how to democratize that technology across the country in all sectors geographically and all sectors of society. Without doing that, that divide that's happening will continue. Small companies are the innovation engine for a lot of large industries. But one of the concerns that this report addresses and looks at getting across is how do we broaden that out? How do we engage the whole country, not just parts of the country in that?
Brian, capital was mentioned right up there, so wanted to turn to you on that. The report underscores the need for federal investment in research and technology, but also there's a critical need for entrepreneurs and startups to receive private capital as well. The Commission considers this a key part of optimizing America's environment for innovation. So, Brian, how do you plan to work with the new administration, and how can the new administration be engaged on this private-public partnership to get capital to the businesses and the innovators that need it?
Well, I think thanks for doing this today. And Mahmood made some of the broad points about democratization and making sure capital comes from all over the country, ideas and innovation. So I think this takes a whole nation approach, as we call it, which means that we have to have the federal government, which has had a leading role for forever in innovative research and funding and things like that. But you also need state and local governments who are now increasingly involved in the nurturing and in the providing the backdrop and the infrastructure to have things happen. So we need a whole nation approach to really drive that. And then we need the private sector capital markets to come in and help deliver the capital. And what you've seen this year has been interesting. Well, we all had the pandemic and the crisis in the lending and the stuff that had to go on around that, and the shoring up big operating companies' ability to survive through the crisis. Underneath that, you've seen the IPO market take off and innovation and life sciences companies and going public. I've got a colleague that took 2 public this year, for example, as an entrepreneur, and that shows you that the capital is there. And what the right structure brings is from that pure research all the way through the capital markets, and thinks about it as a whole business system, whether federal, state, local governments, universities, private sector research, et cetera, and then private seed capital through long-term capital in the public markets. We have to think of this holistic system. We have this competitive advantage that capital markets provides in America. We got to make sure that we're building an innovation process that then allows that demand, it allows that competitive advantage to be taken hold of. So it's there, but we need to make sure we knit it together, and that's where it takes this whole of nation approach.
Ani, another aspect of all of this is the skills factor and the innovation economy requiring new types of work. And we need to engage more Americans across various demographics. How do you look at labor's role in all of this, and your organization in particular? What can you do?
Yeah, you're correct. As we continue to have, new innovations and new technologies, we have to be prepared to train our workers, particularly in construction, to meet those new technologies. And so the IBEW, particularly, we have over 300 training centers all across the United States. So as the new technology, especially when it goes into energy, as we move into more of the renewable energy, that takes a different skill set than it was, just for an electrician or for a lineman. There's specific training and that they need to have. And so we are already in the process of training that future workforce to make sure that we're able to keep up with the technologies as they continue to improve. Also, we have an initiative, what we call IBEW Strong. We know that particularly in our construction branches, that we have not always had as inclusive a workforce as there should have been. Our construction has been dominated primarily all white male for many years. We're in the process of changing that and have been, but we have now started what we call IBEW Strong. And what we're trying to do is reach out to communities that have been underrepresented within our programs and our apprenticeship programs to make sure that they know there's opportunities for good paying jobs in the construction industry and get into our apprenticeship programs. And so they've got an opportunity to have a good paying job and a lifetime career. We're doing that in many ways. Many of our local unions across the country are doing, we're working with the school system and making sure that some of these, I call them kids, but some of the workers of the future have the opportunity to understand what's available to them, and they can actually start doing some of the training online that we offer, like our first year apprenticeship, for example. They can start doing some of the training, so they got a better understanding of what's going to be, asked of them in the different areas of the trade that we cover. And when they get out of school, if they've met all those criteria and been involved, they'll have guarantee entry into our apprenticeship program. And that's something we hadn't had. And we're also expanding. We have we have a national women's committee where we're trying to get, more women into construction trades. And so we've got a national committee to communicate with people. We have a national committee for veterans where we're trying to reach out to veterans, that's coming out of the military. And again, they have opportunity if they want to get into one of our trades, one of our innovations, that they can have direct entry into the apprenticeship program as soon as they're out of the military. And they can actually go through the first year curriculum online before they get out of the active duty. We also have what we call our EWMC, Electrical Workers Minority Caucus. And they've been in existence since 1974, again, to try to reach out to our minority communities and let them know there's opportunities on these jobs. And as these new jobs, especially in energy, the new energy that's coming out, it's going to create a lot of jobs. And there's going to be a shortage of the workforce to be able to, do the installs of the wind and the solar and all of the associated opportunities going to come with it. So we're excited about it. We see great opportunity. We see a lot of opportunity for growth, particularly in the renewable energies as we continue to transform our country and what the energy will be of the future. Thank you.
Michael, I feel like that's your cue. Lonnie needs more help from the educators. So obviously school was mentioned. How are you rethinking, Michael, the educational model and how we can better set up for the future of workers and the innovation economy? And how might the pandemic and the fact that it's been so disruptive on higher education, as well as so many other parts of our economy, present an opportunity to rethink this?
Well, Sarah, I think the opportunity is fantastic. The pandemic has laid bare the fact that our archaic educational enterprises, which peaked in K-12 around 1970 and peaked in terms of outputs and efficiencies in higher education around 1980, are not adequate to the complexities that lie ahead. So one of the things that we've learned in the pandemic is that if you can modernize certain aspects of the educational enterprise, you can expand the reach, you can break down the barriers, you can drop the walls, you can reach anywhere and anyone, anywhere, educate them in any format. You can overcome barriers and gaps if you can modernize the technological enterprise, modernize the faculties, empower the faculties, turn our faculties into super faculty. And I think to the point that you made, Sarah, and to Lonnie's points and earlier, this notion of these isolated, disconnected institutions which operate as sort of like cottage industries, thousands and thousands and thousands of school districts, thousands and thousands of colleges and universities, all trying to solve every little problem on their own. I think the other thing that we've learned is that we've got to work together. We have to find ways to use technology to empower the educational process across a person's entire life. And this notion of elite-oriented educational outcomes, where everyone's just moving into narrower and narrower and narrower pathways where selectivity is the big measurement of outcomes, that's not going to get us where we need to go. So I think the pandemic has created for us the opportunity to vastly modernize an archaic educational structure.
Thomas, national labs are actually mentioned in this report as crown jewels of the US research enterprise, but they're also critical infrastructure that need updating and taken care of. So what do we need to do? And what would you warn so we don't lose these competitive assets in our innovation economy? What would you warn policymakers to do, and what's at risk and what's at stake here if they ignore the council's warnings for you?
Thank you, Sarah. At its core, the Department of Energy is a science and technology powerhouse with an unparalleled network of 17 national laboratories. The DOE laboratory system is a backbone of the nation's scientific research enterprise and is the most comprehensive research network of its kind in the world. The labs also have a statutory responsibility for technology transformation. So over the last decade or so, all of the national labs have been working to strengthen their connection to regional innovation ecosystem. These connections to entrepreneurs, industry, and universities are vital to translating scientific breakthroughs into innovations with an impact on the marketplace. It is really interesting that the national labs are spread across our nation, much like Brian said, we need all of the nation's strategy, in that if you look at our country, the over 3,100 counties, bulk of the innovation jobs that have been created in the last 15 or so years have been concentrated in about 40 or so counties. So how can we get that same, broaden that innovation ecosystem? And I think that the national laboratories offers an interesting opportunity to engage in a broad-based innovation ecosystem built around these huge investments that the federal government has made. The national labs also represent a great opportunity for partnership with academia, where a number of both faculty and students come to perform their research and drive innovation using these unique scientific facilities that national laboratories steward for the nation. So maintaining the vitality, not only of these scientific facilities, but also the innovation infrastructure, which is the people who collaborate with industry, the scientists who collaborate with academia, is essential to preserving that vitality of that important innovation infrastructure for the nation.
To Thomas's point, I read the report, and Brian, I'll toss the one to you. One of the key points in the report was really understanding what the threats are and what's at stake. And I wrote down this quote about China, obviously as a major competitive threat. The report says China seeks to supplant the United States as the world's technological, economic, military, and geopolitical leader. The last few years have been dominated by a trade confrontation when it comes to the relationship with China. How do you see the next few years playing out in terms of the US versus China? And what's the right approach here when it comes to maintaining our competitive edge?
Well, I think there may be different ways about the trade and different negotiation, multilateral versus bilateral, and carrots and tariffs and carrots and things like that. But the reality is that for many years, this has been a core question. And if you want to imitate any system in the world, you would look to imitate the system that America has, which is based on innovation and based on capitalism driving that innovation, and based on labor and labor sophistication and labor relations and rules to protect labor. What wouldn't you do? So knowing how other countries look at us, they look at it and say, how do I imitate the system of education, national labs, labor, capital markets, and everything, and they're trying to do it. The fact of the matter is we're far ahead. The question is that gap's closing? And what the report talks about is that gap closing. And how do we make sure that we put the hammer down on the accelerator and push that gap back out? Not because we just want to win against that country. You want to have the Americans to have the best standard of living of everybody in the world. And that's what we want. And so this isn't us versus them. It's us in favor of us. And so I think that's what the report says. And it takes that holistic approach and a realization that maybe if you don't nurture it as much as you want, you don't have the 5-10 year out innovation that enabled the schools in New York today kept in session even though they're closed for snow. That a year ago, they wouldn't have thought that way, and they wouldn't have been able to do it. 5 years ago, the infrastructure wasn't there. So to Michael's point, what enables him to operate his university difference is look at all this on the screen. Think about the computing power and the distribution power. That kind of infrastructure understanding out of the labs to the execution to the private markets is what we need. And so I don't put this as a we versus they. I put this as how good can we be? We're the envy of the world, and how do we do it in a balanced, a fair way where capital and equity and things like that are premises. But how do we not lose it without that pure science to capital, pure science to good jobs? You're missing it, and that's what the government has to recatalyze, I think, to make it simple.
Yeah, poor kids. They don't get snow days anymore. They get Zoom days. Mehmood, how would you characterize what the pandemic has done to some of these goals and to our competitiveness? We did, and just, since following up on the China point, we did have very different response, different governments to COVID-19. Do you think it's been a setback for the U.S. in this race? Mehmood, you with us?
Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, there we go.
Depends on the time horizon. If you're looking at the short term, no question this has been a setback in the current moment. We will come out of it. The U.S. and most parts of the world have an amazing ability to bounce back. The question the epidemic or the pandemic has raised comes to my mind is two things. One is the resilience of our systems, whether we're thinking about supply chains, innovation engines, operations, communications. How resilient in our systems are they? And the pandemic has tested those. In some, to the point that Brian just made with communications and all this video, we had the technology that could overcome some of it. In terms of supply chain, the US you raised as a prime example where we had issue around supply chains, distribution, manufacture, as simple things like a face mask, right? If you think about the early days. And I think leaders will step back and ask themselves questions around what are critical supply chains, what are critical resilient systems so that we can actually withstand. This won't be the last one. The other point I want to just add on the China discussion is the US is the sole country that has democratized technology over the last several decades, unlike any other society or country in the past. Whether we're talking about aviation industry, automotive industry, the internet, GPS systems, I can go on and on and on. And every one of those innovations came out of academic, government, private sector ecosystem of the US, and we democratized it for the world. I always ask the question, if all these inventions and innovations had been discovered in another country, would they have been democratized as fast? And so one of the reasons, in addition to what Brian said, that we must continue to lead is for not just for the US, but actually I believe for the benefit of the world, because we have demonstrated that we have democratized our inventions and our technologies for the good of everybody. In a different world, I'm not sure that's going to be the case. So it's very, very critical that we continue to lead for ourselves, but also we lead for the benefit of everybody else.
Thomas, as tricky as the COVID response has been in this country, and as terrible it is to watch these rising cases and hospitalizations and deaths, we do have the American ingenuity that will get us out of this, which is the vaccines and the science. And I wonder how you're thinking about that point that Mehmood just made about passing it along to the rest of the world and also keeping our innovation edge leading the global response.
Yeah, I think, again, Sarah, I think that particularly the national labs, our experience is one where we have the opportunity to essentially pivot to a national emergency. So in this case, what we were able to do as 17 laboratory system is to come together, create a national virtual biotechnology laboratory, and apply world's leading supercomputers, light sources, neutron sources, etc., to drive innovation in the early days to create, N95 material for new masks, to later on characterizing the coronavirus using our light sources and neutron sources. So that agility to respond to these crises is something that is truly unique to our country. And as I look to the future, I think, energy transition is going to be a major challenge that not only we as a country, but also as a world will have to face. And, electrification of the transportation sector, utility scale energy storage, etc. And so I think that I believe, I'm very confident about the future because of the innovation capacity and recognizing that economic security is national security. And so making sure that we lean forward with our full force of our national innovation ecosystem is essential.
Lonnie, one thing that has been mentioned that I feel like also has been highlighted by the pandemic is the supply chain issue. And in this report today, one of the principles is a secure supply chain is critical to U.S. innovation, national security, and economic growth. Where are we on that?
Yeah, and there's no doubt about it, is the supply chain. Like you said, you just talked about, as Mahmood talked about, having, some of the essential things that we need to be able to produce and provide here in our country. That we, we take all the resources that we have here already and make sure that for our economic interest and our security interest, that when we have things like, with the pandemic that's come to us, that we can be in a position to provide the protective equipment that our first line responders need to have. And you think about it early on when we had doctors and nurses that were trying to improvise because they didn't have the proper, PPE, as we call it. And so I think we got to make sure in the supply chain and what we're doing for our economy, we need to identify what the essentials are to keep us moving forward and make sure that especially those products are produced here and we keep them in house. And, and we're always going to have the global competition. There's always going to be, some products that's going to be made in other countries. But the core of what we need for our national security needs to be focused here, and we need to be producing them in-house. We need to be looking at manufacturing, that we expand our manufacturing base so we have that same ability to adjust as we once did when we were the industrial powerhouse of the world. We need to be able to be in a position that we can adjust as we need to.
Michael, how important is the relationship with the administration to all of these efforts? And what are your takeaways from the last few years, and how is it going to look different to you in the next few?
Well, the last
Biden administration.
Yeah, the last few years have been, can we dig a hole and hide in it, and then attempt from that hole to somehow force other people to think our way. And I'm speaking broadly here, not specifically about individuals. And so the only way we're going to move forward, as the pandemic has suggested, this is a connected globe. We want to be the most competitive, most innovative, most educated, most capable, most adaptive people on the planet, always winning the opportunities, always moving forward. And to do that, that means then we're going to need powerful relationships with other countries, managed supply chains. We're going to need tremendously focused rule-based systems. As people talk about China, China's a great competitor, but we're playing full contact hockey without all the rules that we need. Let's have some rules. Let's have some penalty boxes, let's find some ways to make this all work. And so I think moving forward in the new government that's coming into place, the notion will be, how does America figure out how to take its innovative talent and its competitiveness and move back to this position of driving the global change that we need, driving the global competitiveness that we need from a position of power. And I think we can do that if we work together and coordinate together, which we can't do if it's all arguments and division and so forth. So I think it's essential that we get on the same page and start moving in the same directions.
Brian, what I love about this conversation is that there's so many good practical solutions, and in the report as well. And I know that's been your core mission here at the council. One of the problems is the backdrop that we're in the economy. We're in a mode where the economy is taking a step back here with rising cases. Unemployment remains very high, and in fact, layoffs are rising. Companies are not hiring; they're laying off. So how much harder does the economic environment make all of these really important goals for you guys to do?
Well, I think when the pie's growing and the tax revenues are growing across the world and that's easy. But the question is, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. And that's where I think you have to make the choices to keep supporting the basics that make the country better 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And I think, that's the key. So we are going to have to get through the rest of this pandemic and really work hard on, and hopefully the stimulus that they're talking about today will get through, because it's really, the world is bifurcating a little bit. There's people who can't be open in their business or can't go to their job because their job isn't there. And then there's the rest of the economy. 94% of the workers are working, and businesses are opening, and doctors are open, and dentists are open. And we've got to take care of that group while we run the last mile in the marathon here about the vaccine and distribution and getting in people's arms. So, but that's all temporary. In the grand scheme of things, this country's been around for a long time. That this will end, and the innovation, everything comes through. The question is, you can't starve the things you need 5 and 10 years down, and that's going to take some tough choices. And that's what I think what Thomas mentions and Monty mentioned. The move to a better place in the carbon frontier, and all the jobs and all the innovation we can bring to task and all this stuff creates a lot of economic opportunity. So we need to prioritize that. Will it be hard? Yeah, but we can do it. So I think it's just a matter of making some difficult choices. But in the very near term, we're going to have to borrow to make sure we help the people who aren't across the river get across the river. Then we can worry about paying it back by growing the pie in the long term.
Finally, Mehmood, just talk a little bit about how you guys plan to engage the new administration, and also engage with this new economy that we're facing on the other side of a vaccine and a pandemic, which is going to look a lot different.
Yeah, I think the key here is education, informing, getting the facts in a balanced, contextual manner. I think we've coming out of a period where there have been contradictory facts, a lot of misunderstanding, sometimes deliberate. This is a time to be objective, transparent, engage, and let's look at this in a balanced manner rather than with a biased agenda. If we can do that, I think we're going to be very successful in engaging from both sides. That's the important thing.
I think we're just out of time, although I could go on with you guys for a while. I'm glad we heard from everybody. 6 people in a 35-minute panel is never easy, but thank you all so much for some of your ideas, practical solutions, setting the agenda here for the rest of the day on these conversations. Deborah, again, thank you so much for having me. And that was a great discussion. And I look forward to what else is in store for the rest of the day.
Thank you, Sarah.